We're going to continue discussing the graphs of sine, cosine, and tangent and talk about some more features that these graphs have. So on Tuesday, we discussed the vertical stretch and the vertical shift. Yesterday, we introduced the idea of the period. So today, we're going to have a Desmos activity for you to complete, but before we do that, I want to introduce a little bit of vocab to kind of help you work out some of those kinks. All right. So there's two words I need to introduce to you. I need to introduce the word amplitude and I need to introduce the word midline. Okay. So amplitude is the distance the graph travels from the midline. And midline is just the horizontal line that travels through the middle of your graph. So if I had to make a midline for this graph right here, well, here's what I notice. I have a point there and I have a point here. This goes from -1 and goes all the way to 1. So I would say that I probably have a midline of y equals, right? So if you notice, y equals 0 would be my midline. And the amplitude is telling me how far you travel from that midline. So the amplitude should always be a positive number, right? Because if I look at this graph, I see it goes from 1 to -1. So it only travels 1. From here to here, it only travels 1. And if I change it, too far, bring it back. All right. From this point and this point all the way to the midline again, it's still a distance of 1. So no matter which way you have it, right, the amplitude would be 1 for this graph. So the reason I bring this up is because we have A and we have B, and we have amplitude and we have midline. So in the activity you're going to do to help you kind of explore this, I want you to keep that in mind and think about what effect the A value has, what effect the B value has, and how does that help determine the amplitude and the midline for your equation. Okay? And if that's true with sine, well, let's take a look at cosine. So cosine has very similar features to the sine graph, right? It has an amplitude and it has a midline because it's telling me, notice how this only works like on the oscillating graph, where it's how far from the midline, the amplitude is how far from the midline the graph deviates from. The midline is sort of, well, what's halfway between the minimum and maximum values there, okay? However, when we talk about tangent though, well, remember that tangent behaves very differently. There we go. That's a traditional tangent graph. It doesn't really have that oscillation, so to speak. You can argue that it maybe has a midline, but since there's no real oscillation occurring, it's just from -infinity all the way to +infinity, I would say you don't have to worry about the amplitude or a midline for a tangent graph. But that's all I wanted to preview, so that way when you start working with the Desmos activity, you don't feel a little too overwhelmed. And for your assignment, you'll have to answer just a couple questions after the activity to help you understand, to see how well you understood the lesson. Cool.